So we're off. This is the first Meet the Alchemist, Meet the Alchemy Wisdom Keepers. And my first guest is Sundy Gilchrist, who is an amazingly good friend. And Sundy's going to tell us her story about moving from a mother lost to becoming a wisdom keeper.
Ooh,
welcome, Sundy, and over to you.
Thank you very much. And this, I'm real privileged to be your first interviewee in this series that you're doing, Jools. So thank you very much. And likewise, a lovely friend that get to spend a lot of time chewing over things together. So yeah, that title, From Mother Lost to Wisdom Keeper, it sounds, there's a part of me that's going, oh, that sounds a bit grand and a bit egotistical. and in a way, I'm owning it, because by golly, I probably would have said something else if it hadn't have been being recorded. This, I've worked my butt off to get through the stuff that I've gone through, from being a child in the family that I was raised in, and then getting married and having children, and then the children getting divorced and the children falling out with me as adults, and then to the point that they're no longer in my life. And that has been such a rich journey into really exploring who I am and why I'm here, and the things that I've collected through that. And it's strange to say this, and through going through all of that experience up until being 60, which is where I'm at now, probably when I was about 57, I really got a handle on why I'm on the planet and what my purpose is. And up until then, I'd sort of like just sort of enjoyed my life in that sort of semi-conscious and conscious way, especially up to my mid-30s. But now I know why I'm here. And it's strange in a way, because I always knew it, but I didn't know it. It wasn't like embodied in me. And the reason why I'm here is just that wisdom, those words of wisdom that come through my own experience and come through me in other ways that I can't quite describe, but I get it. It's through the connection that I have with Source, or the higher power, or the mystery, or God, or Goddess, or whatever we want to label this thing that we don't know about. And very much it is of being service to others, and also having fun doing it. So that's sort of a little bit of that synopsis, if you like, of that journey. And
I get a sense of is the fire, like coming through the fire of, like the alchemy, turning the metal in the forge into a different thing that led to gold. And I don't know how that lands with you, about it being like almost a baptism of fire.
Yeah, I get it. I get it like that. And there's been a few baptisms by fire. There's been a few crucibles that I've been stirred in, and yeah, the all the things that, at the time that didn't seem to make sense. I was going like, did I choose this? Did I choose to get divorced? Did I choose to be in the family of origin? Did I choose for my children to reject me? Did I choose to be a bully? I was a bully at one point. Did I choose all the pain that I brought or developed, or both, in my life? And I can see how those things that happen to me, actually, when I've come through them, the wisdom, the jewels, the gold that I've collected through those leadened, hardened, horrible bits, have been the absolute gift, and I'm so grateful, and the gratitude and forgiveness that comes along with that, that transforming seems to be a process of grief, like having this problem, the lead, and then having the grief of that, whatever that may be, and then the things that I learned from that, the forgiveness, the gratitude, the ways to do it differently, the hindsight that I collect, you know, and not having a judgment around that, you know, like, oh, if only I'd have done this, that, and t'other, it may not have been like that. But it's also like, it's almost like I had to step on certain stepping stones to collect those nuggets of gold, that then I've got those as somehow they've replaced the lead in my body into the sort of the light of my body. So the darkness of my life transformed through those journeys, through those steps, into some light in my life that I feel useful, resourceful, grounded, solid. And you know, as an example, if I think of it, and then I was sort of thinking vaguely about what would be the problems that I could say that I've transmuted or used as transformational experiences. I'm trying to think, because often these things are around, involve other people, and then that in itself can be a problem, because if I'm speaking openly and on public platforms, those people, some of them are still alive, and some of them perhaps would not be comfortable with me sharing those types of things. And yet there's a part of me that if we don't do that, if I don't do that, those lessons sort of disappear, and we never progress as in the family lines or the humanness of us, because it's all just pushed away and shoved in a cupboard, and then maybe it comes out when everybody's dead and it's just history then. I'm sort of losing myself there. But one of the things
that seems to be the way we do it, isn't it? You know, often people write a book about an expose about someone, and it's often after they've passed. And I'm thinking of a famous actress whose daughter wrote a book about her, but she waited until her mother had, you know, passed. And I think often we do worry that the people who in our lives have been there to provide the stimulus material for our own healing, you know, provide the lead for us to actually convert it into gold, we're actually honouring them as catalysts for our own healing. And it's very difficult to kind of explain that to someone else who doesn't always maybe want to embark on the journey. So it's a delicate dance, isn't it, between...
Yeah, and I suppose people have in the past have written books with pseudonyms or as stories rather than actual events, which again can cause problems because people think it's a story and it's not really true. And but I think I can imagine that abuse, because it is, there's something around abuse, and when I say abuse, I mean that all levels of it, anything that's slightly violent, you know, anything that's a communication that's violent or snappy, or when people have an abusive type energy, which is something I have experienced receiving and also giving, it can be hard to talk about that. I've lost my thread there with that one. But so if I start in something that I was born into a family who had that energy, that were very vibrant, very loud, very shouty, hitty, not particularly kind. There wasn't much time for people to be pampered. Pamper wasn't a word that was used in my family, and kindness was missing as well. It popped up occasionally, but kindness was not. The whole sort of there was a rush and a push and a force energy in my family of origin. And you know, when I look back, it took me a long time to come to terms with that energy that I've been raised in, because there was a part of me that wanted to relax and rest, and it was high stress, it was anxiety making, it was unpredictable, it was unsettling. It was an unsettled environment, and I didn't realize just how that formed me as a person. But if I'm talking about lead to gold, that allowed me to be very purposeful. It allowed me to take care of myself, because being part of a large family, I was sort of like just left to my own devices. So I had to look after my own safety. I was asked to do things that were quite high risk, you know, and being on a farm, it was quite high risk, you know, and I was left at a young age being responsible for herds of cows and machinery on my own with nobody around me. So I learned very much, the gold of that would be that I have an acute awareness of how to take care of myself and deal with problems in the moment. Very resourceful. And it reminds me of a lovely story from primary school when I came home with my first ever report from primary school. I think it was the one that we got before we left, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was a mid one. I think I still got it actually, and it showed me maths and English, and then it had something called initiative on it, and I didn't even know what initiative meant, and that was my highest scoring thing on my report. And I said to Mum, what's this? Like, oh, how come this is my highest score? And she just said, oh, well, initiative is something like if a door was to fall on you, you'd know what to do to get out from underneath it. When I look back at that analogy, I think where did she get that from? But I got it, that there was a part of me that could get myself out of a fix, even from a young age. So that was definitely something that I collected from my family of origin, that I could take care of myself and get myself out of a pickle if I needed to. Because of the environment, I wasn't fussed, and I wasn't really looked after in that way. In some ways, I can imagine people would say that I was abandoned, that sort of neglect maybe. But I never chose to label it like that. It's funny, I never chose to label that I'd been neglected until I was a bit older and thought, oh yeah, maybe that was a bit of neglect that was going on.
So do you see the gold coming from the lead of that neglect turning into empowerment?
Oh, very much so. It skilled me up, gave me a tool that I could depend on myself, that I had a strong sense of capability that I didn't in a practical sense, maybe less so in an emotional way, because my story is that I have been a little bit emotionally dependent, on people, but practically, I could get myself out of a fix. So definitely a gold collecting moment there.
So in terms of the emotional journey, would you like to just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, it's interesting that I've raised that. There's I find that hard to explain. There's a part of me that I think possibly this is still in production of being gold. And maybe not. But as a small child, I was born a fifth one of a large family, and I was born after a full-term stillborn baby. And only recently, in my late 50s, did I start to think about this a bit more. And I realised that my mum, and there was stories, that she'd had this baby full term and it died. And the advice given to my dad at the time was, if you want your wife to be happy again, get her pregnant. And so I arrived, and my understanding is that I was cesarean section. And I can only imagine that my mum at the time was probably highly anxious about having another baby, to be honest. And she was in her early 40s when I was born. My dad was 50. And I think I was very, very nurtured in the womb. I'm very forced. I guess she had lots of tests. And then, of course, I was cesarean section. So they gave the date and the time when I was going to be born. So in a way, I think my arrival was mixed with relief, joy, expectation that maybe this little chick me that had been born would bring some healing to the family, because all my siblings were all teenagers when I was born and older. So they will have experienced my mum going through this loss of this child. And it's been an interesting exploring me. So when I was little, I had a sense that I was special in some way, and that I was fussed, and that I was cosseted and very much held up to be this little angel that had come in to sort of like bring healing and joy back into this family. So it's sort of, as the years have gone on, I recognise there's been a huge expectation on me to be happy in my family. I've not been allowed to sort of like be sad or cross, or I've heard it so often, like keep smiling, Sunday, you know, all that. And it has got to the point where it's irritated me. And also anybody who's been my partner, I've heard my siblings say, take care of our little sister to the men in my life, you know. And so in a way, I think that's what I mean about this emotional dependency that I have, that, and how I've felt like there's been an emotional expectation on me, but then I think that's been reciprocated in me having an emotional expectation on others, that that maybe I had that power that I could make people happy or alternatively be sad. So, or cross, and you know, and that was an expectation that came later in my childhood. I sort of remember thinking there was a switch at some point in my childhood where I suddenly realized that I couldn't make people happy, and people got pissed off with me to the degree that they would hit me and shout at me. And I'm laughing because that's another technique I have around diffusing that sort of pain around that, you know. And but it did actually, this emotional dependency and this emotional power, you know, the power element of that it was within me to make people happy, sad, or cross, is something that I still feel that I have that power to do. And I don't know whether you see that as gold or whether that's still lead, and it's probably still in its cauldron of change. All of that is still more to do around that. So thank you for asking me that.
No, I see that it is, not to take away from your experience, but I do think it's very common in families. A particular child, not necessarily an older child, because sometimes there's a lot of expectation on the firstborn to perform in certain ways. The expectation on that you felt was on you is taking on board the job of keeping everyone happy is an enormous burden for a child. And then to see it as power, what I feel that you are trying to come to terms with is the fact that power is there, but not to have it as a power over.
Yeah.
To get to the goal place where I'd like to think we all have an inner power with a small p, as in an essence of who we are and the sacredness of our own essence, and to find that actually that is a power. So for you to be able to label it, I think is magical, is lovely. You know, because we all have an individual uniqueness, and to connect to that it just gives me such a thrill to see it. And the odd times I feel it in myself too. I just love it. So yeah, fair play to you to connect to that and to see it. Because someone who can actually see themselves and then bring that out into service to other people, it's amazing. I love it. And hence the Meet the Alchemists.
And it's funny because from a very young age I was very self-reflective and considered lots of weird and wonderful things. I remember freaking myself at a quite young age, thinking about what happens when you die, you know, and having those and getting freaked out about the size of the space and the universe, and not really understanding how we could all be on this blue blob floating in space, and scared myself silly. And I remember connecting with Dad a little bit around that, and I get it, he had some aspects like that, but probably kept himself busy. We're very much a worky family. If we were poorly or not very well, it was get working, that'll sort you out, you know. And distraction to the nth degree, you know, and so tired that you just crashed into your bed at night. So there's a lot of distraction going on in my family of origin. And then sort of this curious about who I was, and then went through a phase of not actually liking myself very much, and you know, felt like I was all wrong, felt like I was I had this ideal self that I was aspiring to being, but then there was this real self. And I have turned that lead into gold, and I there's been so many steps into that, you know, being critical of myself and being hard on myself and not seeing the funniness in myself, you know, the peculiarities of being human and how funny it is at times, seeing those aspects of myself. Like, I know we've talked a little bit about, we've done Enneagram, and I know I've my personality type is number 8, which is the challenger or the leader, or and they sort of like the wound of that is the power based thing, which I was very controlled as a child. I had these extremes of being very controlled and being very free. So I had both of those, but they seemed to be so far apart. The polarity was like I was micromanaged at some points, and then absolutely left to my own devices at other points. I'm probably the same aspect as well, you know, and milking cows is something that comes to mind. You know, my dad used to be really focused on the detail and how I should do it, and did a little, and then other times he'd just say, go get milk the cows, Sunday, you know, and it and then I was left to my own devices. So those polarities were really, there was a big gap between being micromanaged, controlled, and being free. So that controlling aspect of myself, and where was I at the start with this? That turn it all from finding out who I was and being judgmental and critical of myself, and turning it into seeing the funny side of me. So seeing these aspects of myself that are like the clever clogs. So for instance, if I perceive somebody is trying to come in with a bit more power over me, I go into this sort of like clever clogs, big words, and trying to assert because I feel powerless in some way, I'm trying to assert my power over this person. And I have praise that I can see this, because then just seeing this, I can laugh at myself and see what I'm doing. And then I can make a conscious choice as to whether I actually, oh, hello, I'm going to do it anyway. Or whether I go, oh, yeah, I can see that I'm doing this, and step back, you know. And it's interesting. And, you know, like from that place of being really despondent and bereft around the aspects of my personality, to get into the place where I actually really do love myself now is like a quantum leap from lead to gold, you know. And I do believe that is the crux of it all, that if we all, and if I dare use the word we, if we all were to fall deeply in love with ourselves, the world would be a completely different place. And I know how hard that was, because my beliefs about me were ingrained from others' judgments of me, and then that fostered other people to join in, husband, ex-husband, children, reinforcing my original beliefs around me, that I was selfish, cross, bully type mother, controlling like my dad, all those thoughts, you know, like, and the penny started to drop in when my children were sort of mid-aged, you know, just coming up to young teens. I started to think, what am I doing? Why am I like this? And my own childhood wounds were coming out with my and on my children. And then I realized, you know, that I also was replicating in some ways my relationship with my dad, with my ex-husband. And I see that the way that I was actually co-creating that, and then ending up in a divorce after 20 odd years of marriage and family, and lots of fun, lots of laughter, but lots of like, just like I was with my dad, loud, vibrant, noisy, but also with this undercurrent of repressed violence and abuse and hostility, but not just to other people, but to myself as well, you know, like this, just not liking myself. And so far removed from my ideal self to my real self, it seemed a chasm to cross. And then as change came into my life, I got divorced. Well, it probably started before, really, but in my 30s, I started to unpick all of this and started to get counselling, started to explore more, and went back into education, and that opened up a whole realm of social constructs that I hadn't previously been aware of, you know, like why women lived like this and why men lived like that, and how society's all structured and everything. So all of that allowed me to explore who I was, how I was doing myself, and ease towards some changes that have resulted in me being the person that I am today, which is vastly different.
Would you say that sort of sparking, if you go right back to where you were saying around, you suddenly started to see, or you suddenly started to realise that you didn't actually like yourself very much. Would you say that that's the equivalent of an existential crisis that has sparked your healing journey?
Yes, I would say so. But there's been moments where so when I started having periods, when my hormones, that was a moment where I went into an existential crisis, panics, and when I had babies, I had another one of those. But it was like I missed those gateways. You know, I sort of skirted around the edge of them, really, and didn't really dive in. But then my mum died. That was quite a big one. When my mum died at 35, when I was 35, that got me to sort of start to explore who the heck I was. And so those, like you say, those existential crises, those gateways of change, getting married, whenever there's a loss or a change, those are the moments where the sort of like the questioning comes and the instability arrives in my life. And that's when I started to poke around in. And as I've aged, I see that, you know, I have gone through those portals, and sometimes I won't say I've gone through any of them willingly. I've been dragged kicking and screaming through a few of them. I have to say, resistance, you know, like when you go down a slide and you don't want to go fast and you put your feet and your arms on the sides and you're trying to slow it. That was me. And yet there has been a force that's forced me through these. And as I've gone through these portals of change, I've come out the other side and not really recognized. And now talking to you, I'm thinking, my God, you know, must be, if I was to look at how many I've gone through, it's probably half a dozen, if not more. And they've actually been the vehicles that have gone from the lead to the gold and collected.
And that's my next question, because you mentioned the word loss. And in my experience, life is full of little losses that often we don't actually recognise. And you've just literally reflected that back. And it's my understanding that you're doing a bit of a dig and a delve now into loss and the ensuing grief that comes from losses.
Yeah, it seems to be that's where my focus has gone. And I also see that I've got a sunny nature, and I can also bring grief into a space where maybe for me it was a horrible thing that I didn't want to do, and I can imagine it is for a lot of people. And at the same time, I can see that I can bring a bit of lightness to it with this sunny personality that I've got that seems to bubble up and make light or fun or to something that can be really quite horrible to go through, a loss. And the most horrible experience I've had was being rejected by my adult children, and I can't tell you the amount of gold that I've harvested from that experience, you know. And that has been the lead of my life. I have to say that has been the most difficult, the most challenging, the most upsetting, the most destabilizing experience over a lot of years as well. 3 daughters from 2006 right through to 2016, where it was uncertain, just a whole raft of experiences, having been taken to court, going to events and being ignored, all those sorts of experiences that I've had, you know, not seeing grandchildren, actually having a relationship with grandchildren, and then them not being in my life anymore. The bird has just come to sing, sorry. It's right above here.
Lovely.
Can you hear it? How lovely. And through that experience, I have now developed, and through my own evolving through it all and realizing that I co-created it, and you know, it was part of my, maybe even part of my soul contract to go through this. If we believe that we choose our parents and we come into the family that we choose for our growth, etc., etc. You know, that has been my vehicle of change, and now I have a service that supports others who, and I didn't know that adult child estrangement went on, you know, until I started to experience it and explore it, and I realized that family estrangement is rife, you know, and it's not just adult child estrangement, it's other estrangements within families as well. And so now I have a Facebook group of over 1,000 members who all over the world who come in there to share and explore how to get through the grieving process of losing their adult children, and how that can catapult us into some sort of distress, but also into some growth, if we want to look at it like that, into some personal growth, so that we can expand into being a fully expressed human being, and not just fold up our tent and say, my purpose for being on the planet is now gone because I had all my eggs in one basket, which was family, children and grandchildren, and now they're gone. Why, you know, what do I do with this life? And that leads me nicely into thinking that, you know, that there's a lot of underutilized, a whole reserve section of the society of elder women who have been marginalized for donkey's years, and now, maybe as a result of changes in their life, with their families, have got this freedom, for want of a better word, to explore their own potential and what they want to bring to the world. And that's the creative part of it. That's the part that I'm interested in now that I've gone through the grief, and even though it still pops up occasionally, like it does on Mother's Days and birthdays, and yeah, so very much have I collected a whole bundle of golden nuggets through my experience of being estranged by my adult children. And it sounds strange to say, but very often, I don't think I'm alone in this, that many people would say that some of the worst things that have happened in our lives have actually been some of the best, have turned out to be some of the best things in the long run that happened. People losing jobs and, you know, stuff like that. You know, it opens us up on another level of humanness. It's done that to me, opened me up on another level of humanness and connection to my heart, and the pain that people go through, and how we come through those into something new, into something wonderfully new in some cases.
Would you say, yeah, so would you say then that often people refer to trauma? For me, when someone says trauma, initially I connect to my own experience, which is I carried a wounded child around in me for many years and didn't even know. And then again, when someone else mentions another trauma, sometimes I might think of a car accident, that it can be a very traumatic event. And often these events do lead to significant losses, or they're just perceived losses, because when you're carrying around my wounded child, I grumped around it and resented and thought, oh, well, you know, I never had the chances that other people had. But I think, you know, it takes a massive loss, maybe on top of trauma, that can actually catalyze someone into doing a healing journey. For me, I was incredibly lucky and was able to connect myself to a healing journey. So to actually say to somebody, the grief of a trauma can lead to healing and almost a blossoming and an opening up of our essential self, as opposed to the self that we cling on to, believing that that's what society wants us to be. And how does this inner journey, in your eyes, how would you say it relates to the collective? Because I do know that you have a huge heart, and that your service, you want to not only bring it to individuals, but you dream that this can flow out into the collective.
I don't quite know what you're asking me there.
Well, how does the individual healing journey flow out into the collective? To make it sound a bit more...
Yeah, I suppose it takes a whole load of us to start sharing our stories and also the outcomes of that. Because very often you see the finished product of somebody and not the journey. So there is something about telling the story and telling the journey. And yes, I think you say about the trauma, I think, well, I don't think there's anybody on the planet who's not been traumatized at some point. I mean, we're all traumatized at the moment because of all the COVID stuff. And so I guess people are being triggered at different levels. And so for me, it's around, and there's different levels of trauma, isn't there, as well? I mean, I suppose my main trauma was that I was hit and shouted at a lot. And I can see that I also traumatized myself by hitting and shouting at other people too. So huge forgiveness to all those souls that I traumatized in some way. But to recognize, I mean, I remember rabbit in the headlights, you know, when I get re-shocked, because a trauma does lay down patterns of connectivity in our brains and in our bodies. And so when there's a new shock or a current shock, it can send me into those old patterns, very much so. You know, the rabbit in the headlights type thing, the sort of like the shock of, did that just happen? Did that person just say that? But that realization now that, you know, I'm more than my shocked feelings. My brain is getting better at discerning between my story and what's actually happening. My body's still on a bit of catch up. I get it that I've got all this memory in my body around being in threat. You know, it goes into that flight, fright, freeze, whatever process. So again, it's like working with the body and working with the mind, working with my body, my mind, into not collapsing into those old patterns of when I was traumatized. And yeah, I see that our healing is definitely through that. When we get triggered, for me, when I get triggered, what's going on? You know, what am I to look at here? And so often we put it on the other person, you know, like, don't you trigger me, because, you know, don't you be like that, because I don't want to have to deal with my upsets. But once we can get past that and see that triggers actually are a gift in like uncovering a layer of my own personality and problems, you know, it's such a gift to be able to see that is a real piece of gold there. Once you see that triggers actually are a gift and not a threat.
I get the sense that you are incredibly in tuned. I feel sort of deep dives and amazing highs in you, and your explanation of bodily sense around trauma is fascinating to me, because I was never gifted in that way. On my journey, I've been repressed or suppressed bodily responses to trauma. I don't know, but I've not had the sense in myself that I've been physically connected to my trauma, and that's learning. You know, it's a learning I can go on. I do sense that you are totally connected to your bodily responses to triggers and trauma. Have you got any nuggets of experience that you can share with us on that?
I will. And I also want to say that, like, I just love to deep dive. I'm so curious about this thing I live in. And I think, you know, like, we've sent people off out into space and into the deep seas and into the jungles, but actually the whole world is within us. You know, and if I can hobnob with my heart and kick around with my kidneys, I don't know where those alliterations came from, and loll around with my liver, you know, how wonderful to get into your body and actually be in your mind's eye. Do you remember that film with Donald Pleasance in that, The Fantastic Journey, where they injected some scientists?
Yeah.
You know, it scared me to death watching that. I think I must have been about 7 or 8. And those sorts of films, I guess, fueled my interest in myself, you know, and I'm far more curious in myself than I am in other people. Is that true? I'd probably say about 70-30. I'm more interested in me than I am in others. So when something happens, I'm thinking, how am I relating to this? But getting back to your question about the body, you know, it took me a long time to get into the sensations in my body and listen to, because I used to use my body a bit like a battering ram, really. I took it for, you know, I used to throw it at things and on things and use it, and didn't really take care of its feelings. And I think, you know, my body has its own little messengers in me. So I am acutely aware of those flutters and those little flickerings, and having nerve problems in my back has really helped. There's another lead and gold. Having a bad back and disc problems has really tuned me into my body, and the sensations that I feel, the warning signs, you know, when I sometimes still will ignore it and not do what my body needs, I'll go against what my body needs, which is probably more often than not rest. But tuning in, I developed I went and got the peace process thing that helped me to get in touch with my feelings, like these energies moving through my body, and not really needing to. My take on it is that feelings and emotions are different. Feelings are the sensations that we feel, like the churning stomach. The emotion is what we label it. We give it a label because we need to make sense. Trying to make no sense of things has been very useful for me, like just letting it be rather than trying to make sense of it. Because sometimes there's things that you can't make sense. So I'll get a feeling and I haven't a clue where it's come from. I'm not really bothered because it's here and I'm dealing with the feeling. So it very often wants to come out of me. That's the way I feel of it. You know, I'll get it in my heart and get it in my stomach, and sometimes it'll be in my jaw, and I can feel it moving, and I'm sort of like in my mind's eye helping it to get out. You know, it sounds weird. And now, instead of me being angry with somebody and projecting it onto them, if I've got this feeling in my body, I used to vent it out, which was great because it was out, but it was on somebody else. And I was like passing this pain parcel on to somebody else. I don't want this feeling. Here, you have it. But then what I did, I went inwards. So I suppressed it and made myself ill. And that's where I think my bad back came from, because I'd stopped being like my dad, who was just like out there. And I'd become more like my mother, which was repressing it all in. But then I found the Sunday way, which was like, I now have these feelings that come out and go down a slide, and they go into Mother Earth, and she composts it down because she can transform it into a different sort of energy. And I don't want to pass it on. Neither do I want to keep it. Neither do I want to project it back onto myself, because that's what I did. And it was jolly painful. Was that I think that's probably, if I had to say, that's probably my biggest lead and biggest gold transformation, is how to manage my feelings.
It's that self-flagellation thing, isn't it? Yeah, I'm a bad person, I am this, I am that. And how many of us don't do that? And then even now I feel that I've gone a long way onto my own journey towards the goal of transcending that. And now and again I still think, oh my God, can't believe I did that. And I start to hate myself again. And I have to catch myself on and say, stop. And remember to love myself. It's not easy.
And when in my moments where I don't always get it right and I'm grumbly with Stephen, I will say to him in the middle of it sometimes, I'm being a right grumpy, bumby bitch here, aren't I? And he'll go, yeah. Sorry, darling. Because it is about that. It's about cleaning it up as soon as I realise I'm off down that particular, projecting my frustration out onto somebody else. It doesn't bring harmony to anybody.
You're right there. I think on that note, I will thank you, my darling friend, my wise friend, for being the first one in the Meet the Alchemists series. Yeah, deep bow. And we'll end it there.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Bless
coming.
you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jools. Thank you.
Bye.